Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead and welcome to the first official video of the 2025 Every Bit Counts Challenge. This is the food preservation challenge that we do every August, and I started a few weeks early, and you can find those videos last week and the week before where we've already been preserving food because it's just that time of year on the homestead. But now is the official start, and so in this video I'm going to bring you 7 different food preservation projects. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to preserve sweet corn. We're going to do a blackberry basil canned no pectin jam. We're going to do a canned pickle relish and also some refrigerator pickles in a couple different ways. So if that interests you, why don't you stick around? But before we get started, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Backwoods Home magazine. They have 2 publications. There's Backwoods Home and also their sister publication, Self-Reliance magazine, which I am flipping through here. We love these publications. I've been a fan for over 15 years, and if you like the content that's on my channel, you will love these magazines. It's full of information on animal husbandry, gardening, tips on food preservation, like how to grow and use corn. We're going to be talking about that in this video, but the magazine also talks about information like that. It's just so useful whether you're on a homestead or you're living at home in a neighborhood and are interested in learning about food preservation. There's something in this magazine that you can learn from. So if you're interested, check out the link in the video description and you can get 50% off of your yearly subscription. It's such an amazing deal. So thank you to Backwoods Home for sponsoring today's video, and why don't we get back to it? So to start out the food preservation projects for the week, we stopped by a farm stand. I was taking my daughter Elizabeth to ballet and had a little bit of time to kill and drove past a farm stand that was selling sweet corn. Sweet corn isn't something that I grow in my garden anymore. It just takes up a lot of space for the amount of food that you grow in that square footage. So I choose not to grow it in my garden because I have lots of local sources to get quality sweet corn. And so I drove past the farm stand this week and decided to get their freezer deal. They have a deal where you get 2 bushel bags, which each bushel bag holds 4 dozen ears of corn. And if you purchase 2 of those, you get 1 free. And I can't pass up a bulk buying deal. You guys know me. So I went ahead and bought the 3 bushel bags, which is 12 dozen ears of corn, plus they throw in a little bit of extra. And I got busy with my little helpers here, shucking all of that corn to get ready to preserve it. I like to preserve sweet corn in a couple different ways based on how we plan to use it. So the first and one of the easiest ways to do it is to can it off of the cob. So I'm going to get busy using this really nifty Pampered Chef decobbing tool. I'll go ahead and link this in the video description. This makes easy work of getting all of those corn kernels off of the cobs. And so my first project is canning it off of the cob. We're going to use our pressure canner. But I just start grabbing ears of corn, and I had my teenagers sitting at the other side of the counter chatting with me about their day, and I just went to town taking corn off of the cob. And then I like to wash it after it's off of the cob. So we'll remove it, and then I'm going to run it under the water in the kitchen sink to thoroughly clean it, and then we can start stuffing our jars full of this corn. So I'm going to be preserving this corn in pint jars this year because I find that I rarely need a whole quart of corn unless I'm serving it as a side dish, and that isn't typically how we eat this corn. I usually dump a jar of this into other meals, like it might be added into soup, or I have a salsa recipe that I'll make with black beans and red onion and things, and it calls for about a pint's worth of corn. So that's primarily what I am canning this for. So I'm just filling these pint jars and leaving about an inch of headspace. And then after we get them all filled, I'm going to raw pack these with water. This is just room temperature water straight from the tap, and no need to add salt or to warm anything up beforehand. All of this corn will be cooked during the pressure canning process, and the salt isn't necessary for safe canning. The salt only exists for flavor, and we will salt our food later on. So I am making sure to wipe the rims there because those corn silks can prevent a seal. And then we're going to add our 4 jars canning lids here. If you would like to get 10% off your canning lids, check out the link in the video description, and you can use my code and get some really quality canning lids at 10% off. Then we're going to get our rings on the jars, and we can get these in the pressure canner. These will process for 55 minutes in the pressure canner for the pints. I believe it's 80 minutes if you're doing quarts, and we're just going to get that going. And then after it is done, we can pull those out, and we have wonderful shelf-stable canned corn. I ended up doing 4 batches of these this week, and then we are pretty set on corn for a long time. And there is no waste. All of the cobs got eaten by our beef heifers out here. All of the husks were split between the cows and the chickens. So not only did we get our money's worth out of the corn to feed our family, but the animals also got some free food out of this process. So the next project I'm doing with my corn is freezing it on the cob. Now, we're not a huge fan of frozen corn on the cob, but there are a couple meals, in particular our low country boil that we do every New Year's or close to New Year's in December. Adam likes to make that meal, and we need corn, which is impossible to find fresh in the store that time of year. So this is the time of year that I need to preserve it for later. We blanched it by putting the corn in boiling water for approximately 2 minutes. And after it boiled for 2 minutes, I take it out and let it cool down. The purpose of blanching is to stop the enzyme action in that vegetable, and it produces a superior texture when you go to thaw the product later on, and it also sort of, in stopping that enzyme action, preserves the nutrients. Foods that you don't blanch tend to lose more nutrition while they're in the freezer than ones that are blanched. And another thing that will help preserve and lock in the nutrients and preserve the texture of the food is vacuum sealing. I just find that, especially with something like corn, it gets less mushy later on when it is vacuum sealed. So we got 3 bags of this. That should be enough for the foods that I'm going to use the corn on the cob for, and that is all the corn on the cob that we're going to preserve this year. The rest of it we will preserve off the cob for other types of recipes. So the process for preserving it and freezing it off the cob is pretty much the same. I am going to boil it for 2 minutes, and then we're going to thoroughly dry and cool it down before we package it for the freezer. I'm also going to vacuum seal it off the cob. And the only reason I froze a little bit is the texture is slightly different in the frozen corn versus the canned corn, and I just like to have options. It's always fun to have food preserved in multiple different methods to use for different recipes. And if you follow me during my pantry challenge in the winter, I'll show you how I use these different foods in the recipes that I cook for my family. So how I may use the frozen corn versus how I may use the canned corn. All of that will be explained in the meals that I cook from my pantry over the 3 Rivers Challenge in January and February. So it took me about 2.5 days to get through all of that corn. We ate some for meals too, and then I was ready to move on to preserving some of the other things that are coming from our garden that I didn't purchase from other farmers this year. So every day I'm kind of gathering little harvest baskets on top of harvesting more bulk items. Right now is the time of year mostly for cucumbers and blackberries. Those are the 2 things that are really producing in my garden in abundance this year. So why don't I show you how I'm preserving those items? We'll start with the blackberries. We aren't a huge fan of eating the blackberries raw. Some of the children will eat them, but I find that they aren't as sweet as things like blueberries and strawberries. So I prefer to use our blackberries preserved for future desserts and things. And making Blackberry Basil Jam is what I chose to do this week. So it was just 5 cups of blackberries, and I did 2.5 cups of sugar, and then I added 2 tablespoons of lemon juice to that, and we brought it to a boil. I did crush down the blackberries. No need to remove the seeds. They'll kind of cook down and you won't notice them. And then just at the very end of getting it cooked down, I grabbed approximately 2 tablespoons of chopped basil, and I just kind of stir that in before we get ready to can that. That adds a delicious herbal flavor to this jam that just kind of is wonderful. You guys have to try this. And so we are not using pectin for this jam. It did take about an hour and a half or so for that jam to cook down before I added the basil and get thick enough to be a spreadable texture, which is what you want from your fruit jam. The next thing I did was filled my little half pint jars, and I did do 1 little quarter pint. This will get you somewhere between 3 to 4 half pints of jam if you use this recipe. It just sort of depends on how long you cook it down and how thick you want it to get. Of course, we're wiping the rims of those jars to get a good seal on our lids, and then we're going to get these all secured up with our rings and get them in the water bath canner for 10 minutes. That's all jam takes to process. This is just a really easy project, a great way to use up your blackberries if you have about 5 cups extra. The next project this week is some pickle salsa. So I have some homegrown peppers and cucumbers and some of the onions we harvested last week, and I need to do something with this food. So I started by weighing out approximately 3 pounds of cucumbers. I grabbed some of the larger ones that don't make great pickles. A great thing to do with your larger ones is turn them into a relish of some sort. So we're going to make, it's this pickle salsa, it's kind of like a relish, but it is a little different. So I chopped my cucumbers up with the peels and all, and the next thing I'm going to do is chop up approximately 2 cups of onions. You can see how large I have them here, and don't worry, we are going to blend these up later. The next thing I'm going to do is measure out some peppers. You could do any kind. So I'm doing 1 cup of green peppers and then an additional cup of spicier banana peppers. You could do sweet red peppers if you want. You could do any kind of spicy pepper. It just depends on how hot you want your pickle salsa to be. This was good for my family. So in total, you want 2 cups of peppers. And we're going to add that to our big bowl, and then I'm getting out my immersion blender and blending that up. So typically when you would make a relish, you would remove a lot of the centers of those cucumbers, and you would boil it down to remove the excess liquid. But we're making more of a salsa texture, so I'm not going to take the time to cook any of this down. We are doing quick, small batch canning here. I had kids' schoolwork that I needed to get to, and so this is going to be a little different than a typical relish recipe, and you're going to see it's going to be very delicious. So I did a 1/4 cup of salt, and then to that we're adding approximately 2.5 cups of sugar. It is going to be a sweet relish. Next, we're going to add our vinegar, and I'm using distilled white vinegar. You want to make sure it's store-bought at 5% acidity, and I did 3 cups of vinegar. Next, I'm going to add approximately a tablespoon of mustard seed, and then I also decided to add a tablespoon of crushed red pepper. So at this point, if you wanted to, you could cook this down and get it really thick and turn it into a relish that would be, I guess, a thicker and more spreadable item that you're used to. We are going to turn this into a pickle salsa. So I'm going to directly put this in jars. It's going to be more watery on purpose, and I'm going to show you in the end how I will use this when I open up a jar. So we're just stirring everything together to make sure all of the contents, the sugar and all of the spices are equally mixed, and then we're going to fill our half pint jars up, leaving about 1 inch of headspace here. Now, typically when you can vegetables, you would need to can them in a pressure canner because they are a low acid food. But since we pickled these and added the vinegar to it, that brought the pH level to a point that it can be safely water bath canned. Water bath canning is for more acidic foods like fruits and pickles. So we're just going to get these all prepped and ready. I'm counting to get my lids on there. I got them all washed up. And these are going to go in the water bath for 15 minutes. And then when we're done, we will have our pickle salsa all ready. So let me tell you how I plan to use these. So it is a salsa, just like you would with a tomato-based salsa, but this is cucumber-based, and you can use it to dip chips in. You can mix some mayonnaise with it to make a dip that is delicious, almost like a tartar sauce dip. But I typically use this to make tuna salad or chicken salad. So let me show you how. So what I'm going to do is strain out the solids, and then we'll have this almost syrupy, because it did have the sugar and the vinegar in it. It's like a syrup that is left behind. And then the solids can be added into our tuna salad, with just some tuna and mayo, and it gives that delicious relish flavor. And then the liquids that are left behind make the most delicious salad dressing. So with that little jar of liquid, I can add some oil, like avocado oil or olive oil, and then I will use that on a salad for salad dressing. So this is a great multi-purpose canning item that I'm excited to add to the pantry. A couple weeks ago, I showed you a really easy lacto-fermented pickle recipe, but this week I decided to work on some refrigerator pickles. The lacto-fermented are really delicious, but they don't have that vinegar taste, and so I wanted to give my kids some options. Some of them like more of a vinegar taste. So here's what I'm doing. I am adding, and I'll put the full recipe in the video description, but I added my sugar and salt. I did some garlic scapes, dill, and then I did put bay leaves in to help with texture. That helps keep your pickles crunchy. And then I chose some of my smaller cucumbers that are still rather firm and not as watery. That will help keep a crunchy texture to these refrigerator pickles. And then I'm packing the jar as full as I can. We are going to add a little bit of turmeric. It's just about, I don't know, a quarter of a teaspoon or so. And we're going to put that in there, and that'll help give these pickles that typical yellow color that you get with store-bought pickles. I filled it up about 3/4 of the way with vinegar, and then I topped it off with water, but I will give the exact amounts that I used in that recipe in the video description for you if you're interested in that. I had lots more cucumbers to use up, so I decided to do a big half-gallon jar of pickle slices as well, except we're going to do these a little bit differently. I had made in last week's video some lacto-fermented banana peppers, and I had leftover brine that I had put in a jar and put in the fridge, and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to use that brine up. So I am just going to simply pour this over the cucumber slices. I did add a little bit of turmeric for color, but then that brine will add a little bit of probiotic to these and help keep these preserved in the fridge until we are ready to use these, which they'll be used up in no time at all with how much we have been eating things like hamburgers this summer. So we're just going to get that all shaken up, mixed up, and add that to the fridge, and then these will probably be gone within the next couple weeks. And these were the last of my cucumbers, really. I just planted this week in the garden the fall set of cucumbers, and with those that grow, that will be what we will preserve for pickles to get us through the winter. Right now, a lot of the pickles that I've been making are mainly for fresh eating. So that was it for this week. I'm just getting all of my canning jars labeled. I mostly label them if the contents are pretty obvious. I just put the year on top. Like, I know this is sweet corn. I don't need to write sweet corn. If it's something like a jam, like the blackberry jam that could be any other kind of fruit, I will label it and put the name on top. But I'm pretty simple with my labeling. Just put the year on top, and then we can bring these down to the cellar and start getting them put away. I typically don't organize everything until the end of the canning season because I can see how much I have of each type of item and then decide where I want to put them on the shelves. So for now, I just kind of bring it down in boxes. We'll set those boxes on the shelves down there, and then I'll take an afternoon when things cool down, typically in like September, and I'll start sorting through everything and get it all labeled and organized for the winter to enjoy. So hopefully you enjoyed these different methods and recipes that I gave you in this week's video. I will be back next week with more food preservation projects. As always, make sure you're following the hashtag #EveryBitCountsChallenge so that you can check out all of the other amazing homesteaders and food preservationists and content creators that are participating in the challenge this year. And you can also do that on Instagram by following the account Every Bit Counts Challenge. There's an actual separate account there that you can follow. So I hope everybody is enjoying their summer and all of the preserving that you're doing. We will be back next week, friends. Bye.